This photo of two young men standing together seemed like a simple memory, until one curator realized it held a story much deeper and darker than anyone expected. At the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., donations arrived almost every day. Families sent old photographs, letters, and heirlooms, hoping to contribute to the preservation of Black history. James Rivera, a curator at the museum for 5 years, had examined thousands of these submissions. He'd seen portraits of freedmen, civil rights leaders, and everyday people living ordinary lives across generations. But one humid morning in September 2024, a new box arrived that made James pause. It came from an estate sale in Richmond, Virginia. The enclosed note explained that the items had belonged to a woman named Dorothy Hayes, who had passed away at 97 with no known relatives. Her home had been full of historical materials, carefully preserved but undocumented. The estate's executor thought the museum might find something valuable. James opened the box and found a leather portfolio. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a studio photograph mounted on heavy cardboard. The photographer's stamp read Anderson & Son Photography, Richmond, Virginia, 1889. The photo showed two young men standing side by side. Both wore matching dark suits, stiff white shirts, and patterned ties. Behind them was a painted backdrop of a library, with books lining the shelves and a small table nearby holding a vase and what appeared to be a Bible. On the left stood a white man, likely in his early 20s, with light hair and the beginnings of a handlebar mustache. He looked directly at the camera, his face calm and confident. Beside him stood a black man about the same age. He had a sharp jawline and clear, intelligent eyes. He wore the same formal suit, tailored and expensive. But it was their posture and their connection that stood out. The white man's hand rested on the black man's shoulder. The black man's hand gripped the white man's forearm. Their pose was one of closeness, of solidarity. In 1889 Virginia, just 24 years after the Civil War and in the heart of segregated South, this was more than unusual. It was unheard of. Portraits in that era weren't casual. They were expensive, formal affairs. Most were planned with care and intention. That's why this image caught James's attention, not just for its rarity, but for what began to reveal itself upon closer inspection. He pulled out his magnifying glass and studied the photo again. The white man's hand, at first glance supportive, was actually gripping tightly, his knuckles visibly tensed. And the black man's smile? It didn't quite reach his eyes. His free hand hung by his side, clenched into a fist. Then James noticed something in the lower corner of the backdrop, partially hidden by the table, a painted chain, not part of the elegant setting, yet deliberately included. Why would a photography studio blend a symbol of captivity into a scene meant to suggest learning and refinement? He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded ink, was a message. Thomas and Marcus, the last photograph before the departure. May God forgive us for what we have done. September 14th, 1889. He read it again. What we have done. Not what they planned to do. Something had already happened. Something that required forgiveness. James snapped high-resolution images of the photograph from every angle. Then he opened his laptop and began to search. Who were Thomas and Marcus? Why had they taken this photo together? And what did they need forgiveness for? With no last names, finding them was difficult. He started with the studio name. Richmond Directory showed Anderson & Sons operated from 1885 to 1893, serving distinguished families. That made the interracial photo even more unusual. James examined the photo under different lighting. Everything about the image, the suits, the polished shoes, the backdrop, suggested wealth. But something about Marcus's posture felt guarded. James had seen similar expressions in photos of freedmen after emancipation. People who were technically free, but still lived under constant scrutiny and danger. He reached out to Dr. Patricia Okoye, a historian at Howard University. She had deep connections in Virginia archives. When she saw the photo, she agreed to help. They arranged to meet at the Library of Virginia to dig into historical property and legal records. That night, James couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The chain, the inscription, the tension. It all suggested something far more complex than friendship. The next day, At the library in Richmond, James and Patricia requested records from Henrico County dating back to the 1860s. Within an hour, Patricia found something. Oakwood Plantation, owned by the Whitmore family. William Whitmore had inherited it in 1867. In the 1860 slave schedules, the family had held 43 enslaved people. By 1870, William still lived at Oakwood, but now listed workers as employees. One name stood out, Marcus Freeman, age 16. That was it. Marcus had taken a surname after emancipation, Freeman. He was no longer property, but a person. Still, he had stayed at the same plantation. James dug into court records and found Marcus's first labor contract. Dated January 1866, it bound a 14-year-old Marcus to work for William Whitmore for $5 a month, plus room and board. It also claimed Marcus owed $20 for his care after emancipation, a manufactured debt that would take 4 months just to pay off. James flipped through the years. 1867, 1868, 1870. Year after year, Marcus signed or marked with an X new contracts. The wages never rose. The terms never changed. These weren't fair employment agreements. They were legal traps. Patricia said what James was already thinking. This was debt bondage, slavery by another name. The contract stopped in 1885. That raised new questions. Had Marcus escaped, or had something worse happened? Searching further, James found a court case filed on September 10th, 1889. William Whitmore suing his son Thomas over a property dispute. The documents were vague, but one phrase stood out: human chattel unlawfully retained. James looked up, stunned. Human chattel in 1889. That same day, Thomas filed a counterclaim. He accused his father of holding workers in illegal servitude and said he had proof. The timeline was aligning. The photograph, the inscription, the court filings, it all pointed to one thing. Thomas had discovered what his father was doing, and he had chosen to speak out. He chose justice. But what happened next? There were no records of a trial, no verdicts. Then Patricia found something chilling, Thomas's obituary. October 2nd, 1889. Just 3 weeks after the lawsuit. Cause of death, accidental shooting. The report claimed he had been cleaning a rifle. A follow-up article praised the Whitmore family and dismissed the death as a tragic accident. No mention of the legal case. No mention of Marcus. Patricia shook her head. This feels like a cover-up. James agreed. If Thomas had died while trying to free Marcus, what happened to Marcus himself? They searched for Marcus Freeman in the 1900 census. Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina. Nothing. It was as if he had vanished. But then, a break. Dr. Raymond Cole from a Freedmen's Bureau project called. I think I found him, he said. In 1891, a Marcus Freeman joined the First Baptist Church in Philadelphia. Age 24. Born in Virginia. Occupation, carpenter. James pulled up city records. In 1892, Marcus Freeman was listed as living on South Street. By 1895, he owned a small carpentry business. He made it, James told Patricia. He got out, but they still needed to know how. Then they found the article that changed everything. October 1899, Philadelphia Tribune. Local businessman shares story of escape from debt servitude. Marcus had spoken publicly. He told his story to a church congregation. The article didn't share every detail, but said he described years of forced labor and a friend who had died helping him escape. That friend was Thomas. James kept digging. In 1902, Marcus testified before Congress about peonage, labor systems that trapped black workers in debt. The transcript ran 15 pages. Marcus shared everything. Born enslaved, forced into labor contracts after the war, bound by debts he could never pay. When he tried to leave, he was arrested and dragged back in chains. I was free by law, Marcus told Congress, but a prisoner in fact. He described how Thomas returned from school, discovered what his father had done, and decided to fight. Thomas copied records, collected evidence, and filed legal papers, knowing the risks. He told me, Marcus said there would be consequences. Marcus's testimony confirmed everything. Thomas had stood up for his childhood companion, and he had paid for it with his life. The photograph captured the moment before everything changed. Two young men side by side, dressed alike, tied together by fate and history. William Whitmore was enraged. Marcus remembered every word. He had accused Thomas of betraying his own blood, of turning his back on the family, of siding with a black man over his heritage. But Thomas didn't flinch. He told his father he couldn't, in good conscience, build a future on Marcus' continued suffering. Just 4 days later, on September 14th, Thomas took Marcus into Richmond. He paid for a formal portrait, not just a keepsake, but a statement. Marcus later explained that everything about that photo was intentional. The matching suits, their equal posture, the choice of Anderson and Sons Photography, a studio known for capturing the city's most respected families. It was a way for Thomas to show the world that Marcus was not beneath him, but beside him. Thomas wanted proof, Marcus said later. Proof of our friendship, proof of his choice. But what the image couldn't show was the fear behind their eyes. By that point, both of them had received warnings. Thomas had been threatened. Marcus had overheard whispers from other workers. Something was coming. Justice in 1889 Virginia was rare, especially for black laborers. And powerful men didn't give up power without a fight. That inscription on the back of the photo, "May God forgive us for what we have done," took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't about guilt over wrongdoing. It was about crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Thomas had chosen justice, knowing it would tear his family apart. When Marcus spoke about Thomas's death before Congress years later, the pain in his voice could still be heard, even in the formal transcripts. He told the committee how, on the evening of October 2nd, 1889, he was working in the carpentry shop at Oakwood. Thomas, by then, had moved into a separate cottage to distance himself from his father. That night, Marcus heard a gunshot. He rushed into the main house and found Thomas lying in a pool of blood. With his last breath, Thomas whispered, "Run, Marcus. Papers. Desk. Run." Moments later, William Whitmore and the sheriff burst in, accusing Marcus without question. Marcus fled, hiding in the woods before returning under cover of night. In the overseer's cottage, just where Thomas had said, he found the legal papers that freed him. He traveled north on foot, carrying only those documents. In Philadelphia, he rebuilt his life. Years later, his granddaughter, Dorothy Freeman Hayes, unknowingly donated a box to the museum. Inside was a photograph, Thomas and Marcus standing side by side. James Rivera, the curator, traced the family's history and discovered the original court order, Thomas's affidavit, and Marcus' personal diary. Thomas had knowingly risked everything to free his friend. Marcus had preserved the truth for generations. James contacted Alicia Freeman, Marcus's great-great-granddaughter. When she saw the photo and read the documents, she wept. "Now he's real," she said. 6 months later, the museum opened the photograph that testified. Visitors stood silently before the image. The truth had waited 135 years. Now it was finally being heard.